want to say a few words about the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible in its final form is organized into three different sections, the finalized Hebrew canon. The first is the Torah, which is normally translated in English law or instruction. I prefer instruction. We'll talk about why when we get into that. Um, this is also known as the Pentateuch, first five books of the Old Testament, Genesis to Deuteronomy. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That is the Torah, the first section to be finalized and come together in its final form. The second section is the Nevi'im, the prophets. The prophets are divided themselves into two sections. You have the former prophets, or the early prophets, from Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Wouldn't normally think of those as prophets in Christian tradition, but they're considered prophets in the Jewish canon. And the latter prophets. Please make sure you spell that correctly. Latter prophets with T's, as in later, latter. I have gotten back on tests latter prophets. Apparently those are the prophets who are, I don't know, going around climbing things, putting up Christmas lights and changing light bulbs and cleaning gutters. These are the latter prophets, the later prophets. Okay, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the Book of the 12. The Book of the 12 would have been one scroll that had Hosea and Amos and Jonah and Joel and all of those that we think of as prophets there in the Old Testament. The third section is known as the Ketubim. I've often joked that Ketubim is the Jewish way of saying miscellaneous because it is everything that's not a law or a prophet goes into the Ketubim. So that's Psalms, that's Job, that's Ruth. Interesting, that's Daniel. Daniel is not considered a prophet in the Jewish canon. He's considered a writing in the Jewish canon, probably because it was written so late and written in Aramaic. But these three sections, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, are how you divide those 39 books in the Old Testament. And these three sections have also given us an acronym for the whole Hebrew Bible. And when the whole of the Bible is referred to, you'll hear it sometimes called the Tanakh, and that's from the T and the N and the K from Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, to refer to the Hebrew Bible or the whole Old Testament. Now, the text comes together over a very long period of time. The Torah certainly finalized by 400 BC. The prophetic corpus is probably finalized around 200 BC. The writings seem to still be in flux going into the first century. But this Hebrew Bible is standard and official, particularly after Jamnia, is when you start to see them establishing for sure. These are the three sections. These are the 39 books. It wasn't until the 4th to 10th century CE, so much later, that we have a group of scribes who we call the Masoretes, that you really want to talk about a final formal Jewish text. The Masoretes, that word in Hebrew means transmitters, they were a group of Jewish scribes and masterful scholars, and they transmitted, so they get their name, preserved the canon that we see at Jamnia, those 39 books that you think of as the Old Testament. And they were exceptional scribes. They were tremendous. They supplied the Hebrew text with its verse divisions. So if you want to know why there are verses in the Old Testament, you can blame the Masoretes. Paragraph, they gave some interpretive notes. They also designed a vowel system. Up until this time, the Hebrew text had been transmitted without a written vowel system. Now, obviously, they had it when they spoke it, but they only wrote consonants. And so these scribes in the 4th to 10th century actually developed a vowel system. And I want to show you a little bit of what the difference is. An unpointed text looks kind of like this. So you see that you just have letters there, and I want you to compare that to a pointed text. So you see what they've done is they've just stuck vowels around the letters because those consonants already existed in place, and so they had to find a system that they could put around that would fit around that. But what this ended up doing is you ended up having fun with vowels because think about it in English. If you didn't have a written vowel system in English, then bird and beard and bread and bride and board would all be exactly the same word, among others. And it would take the context of the story for you to figure out what is actually going on in the story. Well, modern Hebrew and ancient Hebrew was written without vowels, and this ends up letting people have a little bit of fun with the language. A friend of mine years ago had a modern Hebrew bumper sticker that he had on the back of his VW camper, and on it, it had Sa Lahat. It had this phrase, Sa Lahat. Well, depending on how you say it, it's either Sa Lahat or Sa Lahut, and it either means drive slowly or go to the Hut, go to Pizza Hut. It's a Pizza Hut bumper sticker. And so there you see that kind of fun they were having with those, with the ambiguity that comes in no vowels. One a good example of this in the Old Testament, there are a few interesting examples where the meaning might be affected. My personal favorite comes in 1 Samuel 9:7, where you have Saul, who's going to meet the prophet Samuel for the first time, and most Bibles translate, "What can we bring the man?" And because he's asking, do we need to take him a present if he's going to give us an answer? But without vowels, that also reads, "What is a prophet to man?" And when you understand Saul's problems of understanding, listening to the voice of God later on, there could be some sort of subtle foreshadowing here in the mouth of Saul of how he's going to miss the point of the words of God later on in the story. So that's a neat place. There are a couple of others where folks play with it a little bit, but I just wanted you to be aware of all that's going on in this text that we call the Hebrew text as it's been transmitted.